Hello, Dr. Hogue, Mac students. My name is Nick Gervasini, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a rev rec fraud that occurred at Comscore a few years back. So Comscore, a little overview. As you can see from the slide, Comscore specializes in data science that measures household and personal level audiences. Basically, they gather information on the people who consume these different media platforms and sell the information to marketers and provide services so that these people can do very, very effective target marketing. So one of their primary assets is this information that they collect. And what I find so interesting about this type of product is that it isn't like any kind of inventory, because you can sell it and sell it again and again. And part of it's a service, but part of it is actually like being able to collect this data. And this data does have like a pretty material value, and like it's a pretty significant portion of Comscore's total assets. Also, in the years related to the fraud, Comscore had total revenues of $329 million and $367 million, which will be relevant later. Let's take a look at the basics of the fraud. So SEC charges in fall of 2019, so pretty recent history. Serge Mata, Comscore's then CEO, directed Comscore to engage in some non-monetary transactions that effectively overstated revenue by approximately $43 million over the related time period. Which gave the impression of like very steady revenue growth, just over analyst estimates. So for those of you who remember, who were here for undergrad, you may remember Dr. Barone throwing this our way in 360, and while the transactions Barone was talking about aren't exactly the same, because these are still revenue transactions, so they were correctly treated as revenue if they were commercially substantive. So if you remember commercial substance, basically, is this affecting cash flows to the company? It needs to have that in order to be to recognize the gain side on a non-monetary transaction. Very similar for a revenue transaction. So we need to maintain, we need to know that these transactions have commercial substance. If you want to look at the journal entry, it's right there. It'll be on the next page as well. So the transaction price of these occurrences was determined by the fair value of the assets given up by Comscore, which the SEC suspects was highly overestimated, just given the value they were or the information that Comscore is exchanging. Furthermore, Comscore was just throwing a bunch of other data into these deals that customers did not want, need, or use. So just pouring in other information basically is an opportunity to, or an effort rather, to boost the revenue that was going to be recognized by virtue of these transactions. And the customer, of course, was not complaining because it didn't affect the fair value of what they were having to give up. And also, they were getting everything they wanted from the transaction, whether that information that Comscore was throwing in was there or not. And the SEC found that none of these transactions were at all commercially substantive. So a couple of other things Mata did. He made false comments to the internal accountants and the auditors. So basically tried really hard to deceive his own internal accounting staff and the external audit team, which is not great. And he also disclosed false information related to the company's customer base. Dues paid, what happened? Amazingly, when Mata agreed to settle the charges with the SEC, he never even had to admit guilt. Comscore and Mata agreed to cease and desist the improper revenue recognition practices, and Mata paid penalties of $700K and repaid Comscore $2.1 million for his profits made in stock-based comp, and Comscore paid penalties of $5 million to the SEC. Mata also agreed to not serve as a public company officer for 10 years. So amazingly, after all this, he still gets to in 10 years. And he has, he can go serve as a private officer right now. So, kind of interesting. The audit and lessons learned. So I think this is a hard one because there isn't a lot of information out there on what the auditors actually got to see. How well masked were these transactions? It's really tough to know. There's also not enough, not a ton of information out there on this case. But given the information available, I definitely get the sense that the auditors thought something weird was going on and were given enough support to basically just let the transactions go. We know that Mata had successfully deceived the auditors about the purpose and substance of these transactions. And so just some possible audit procedures. Honest to God, sampling the most material transactions. We know that the entire $43 million overstatement was a result of just 3 transactions. And for a company doing 350-ish million in revenue, you'd think this was something you'd want to look at as an auditor. Another thing is just to always remain professionally skeptical, especially if something doesn't seem right, which something didn't seem to look like. Just given the information available, again, it seems like the auditors were aware that something was wrong. So when something weird comes along, it's important to always consider what is the actual economic substance of the transaction, and not really rest until you're satisfied with that. Thank you all for listening. I hope you found this interesting and enjoy the presentation. See ya.